Hello and welcome to yet another exciting edition of BizTech on GhanaWeb TV with me, Mali Aholimega. Today we'll delve into the stalemate in Parliament, which has forced the Minister of Finance and particularly the entire government business to be on hold. This is due to the non-passage of the appropriations bill, which is expected to be delivered on November 15 by law in Parliament. To discuss this with me, I have Alhaji Mumini Mohammed, who is the Deputy Country Director for Send Ghana. We'll be talking about this topic. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to GhanaWeb TV. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, and you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
So, as you're aware, we've had an impasse in Parliament for some time now about the minority and the majority side. They had to go to court. But most importantly, we're supposed to pass an appropriation bill. The date has elapsed. What do you think are the implications of this, particularly moving on to an election year and then subsequently 2025?
Great, thank you very much. I think that this is a very difficult situation we find ourselves, and as an organization, and for that matter, civil society, we are very much concerned and worried that by law, the executive, and for that matter, the Minister of Finance is mandated to have presented the budget by the 15th. Because of the impasse in Parliament, this hasn't been done. So what is the implication on that? As far as 2025 is concerned, the country cannot be shut down because of the impasse in Parliament. The executive has a responsibility to make sure that regardless of the impasse in Parliament, the executive has the mandate and the duty to work with the legislature to make sure that this mandate, which requires that, and this is even an election year, is very much critical because government might change. Even if it's the same ruling party that wins, it still would mean government would change. So it is more critical this year that we are likely to have a complete shift. And we would definitely require that 3-month caretaker budget to happen so that whoever forms government, whichever party forms government, would then have something to rely on up until the first quarter to develop its budget. So this is a very critical situation we find ourselves, and I think that as a country, we have to lay the blame as it is now on the executive for having been able to intervene. Of course, there's an issue that has gone to Parliament and all of that. What has been the role of the executive, in addressing the problem? We know that in Parliament, the executive controls the majority. To what extent has the presidency worked with the majority side to make sure that this law, which mandates the Minister of Finance to present the budget by the 15th, would not have been breached? And that's a matter we have to look at. But most importantly, the consequence of that in terms of our forward march for 2025. If the appropriation doesn't happen, what are we going to do? So this is a matter that requires the presidency to actually take steps, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in Parliament. Of course, the legal battle has been settled, but it definitely would require that the executive plays a role in this as far as we are concerned.
Thank you very much, Alhaji. Do you think this situation that we have in Parliament could undermine public confidence in whichever government that takes over come January 7th?
Yeah, it can depend on how it's managed. Of course, given how it's been managed, public confidence in terms of our institutions, our arms of government, I am sure the recent Afro barometer has indicated. I mean, public confidence in our institutions in terms of how they are able to deliver on their mandates is reducing year on, and that's something that whether legislature, the executive would have to pay attention, but also most importantly, the judiciary. All of these arms of government are supposed to work collaboratively to make sure that the governance of this country it's actually, moving in a way that all of us would desire.
Thank you very much. Now let's come briefly to the economy. What do you think are some of the long and short-term repercussions of this impasse in Parliament, particularly on government policies and how they are going to roll out some of their policies?
Yeah, so as far as we are concerned, the government side had a number of, policies that were supposed to be laid in Parliament. Most of them required, some had to do with facilities that would definitely be used to, shore up our economy. But the fact that these facilities, for instance, some of those loans that were expected to, pass through. To the extent that it has not happened, already as a country, we are beginning to feel, the impact of that. But the impact would even be more dire if nothing is done, and then we move into 2025 without some of these, interventions that could have cushioned the economy, because we do know that we are not in normal times. And to the extent that government had come up with innovative ways in terms of, specific facilities to help cushion the situation, if it doesn't happen, it definitely has implication on the economy and the livelihood of Ghanaians in general.
Just quickly still on the economy, we have a lot of international development partners. We are already on an IMF program. The World Bank is also a partner for us. They do a lot of projects in the country. How do you think this is going to affect our relationships with some of our international development partners?
Well, in terms of the IMF, we have a program with them. And if this situation is not addressed, it will definitely have implication on our next review. We've set ourselves some targets, and most of those targets would be achieved if some of these facilities and interventions government had planned were able to go through. So it might not be an issue of relationship, but it will be more of how we are able to achieve these targets. We have a program which has set milestones and targets. So if we don't achieve that, it has implications on the ability of the fund to release the remaining funding that we expect from the IMF. So what is happening definitely has implication on the current IMF program. And that is why government has to be concerned. And the executive has to take steps to make sure that this situation is curtailed.
So recently the speaker said they have to build consensus. This issue could have been resolved initially by coming to him, both parties sit down and all of that. How important is political negotiation in addressing this particular impasse? Because we are in uncharted territory, actually.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think globally, political negotiation is what has worked everywhere. And for us in Ghana, the very moment we found ourselves having a hung parliament meant that it was non-negotiable. We needed to have a situation where political negotiation would have been the order of the day, given that no party has the clear numbers. And so, without having to resort to, the judiciary, and for instance, using the legal arm, we could have actually negotiated. It doesn't mean that if today you are majority and tomorrow you are minority, government business should shut down. In other countries, governments, are a minority and they're able to negotiate. Yeah. That's why we have lobby. It's normal. Why is it extraordinary? Why do we think that it cannot happen in this country? And that's something we need to begin to think about. We might have a situation in Ghana tomorrow where the party in power would have less numbers. Does it mean that government will not function? Is that what it means? And so, political negotiation is very critical. And as a country, we have gotten to a stage where we need to begin to see that as one of the tools to be able to resolve differences, whether between, political parties, between, the various arms of government. Because we are beginning to see a head-on collision, given what we are seeing between the legislature, the judiciary, but also the executive. But these are all states, institutions that have clear mandates. And so to the extent that we are not able to adopt political negotiations, and there are aspects that can help those institutions. Of course, when this happened, I had Austin Gami and some of those aspects who are very good in negotiations, trying to intervene to see how this could have been resolved. And that is a role we had expected the executive to play, not to interfere, but to find a way to make sure that there was a mechanism to address the situation.
Finally, two quick questions. What exactly is Send Ghana's position? What message would you want to send out there, particularly to the executive, to the legislature, because they seem to be in this tussle? And finally, in your opinion, what key lessons do you think government as well as lawmakers should be drawing from this particular crisis?
Yeah, thank you very much. So for us in Send, our position is clear. We are saying that, first of all, the law has been breached. By now, we should have had the budget presented, and we should have been in the process. At least Parliament should have been in the process of reviewing that to come out with the appropriation. As we said, that hasn't happened. And so we expect the executive to take that extra, effort to work with the legislature to make sure that this happens as soon as possible. I am sure the door for negotiation is still not closed. It's still open, and if the executive is very much committed, it still can work with the legislature to make sure this happens. This is the only way we can curtail a potential crisis or government shutdown, come next year. And that for us is very critical. So, we think that, as I said earlier, the best is for us to recognize that as a country we have a constitution which is clear on the various roles of the arms of government. Of course, sometimes there are issues within our constitution, but it requires for cool heads. It requires for negotiation so that we can always arrive at a situation which would not lead to a complete shutdown of government business. It is not in the interest of anybody for government to shut down. It has implication even for the current opposition. Because if there's a government shutdown, everybody gets to suffer. Nothing happens in this country. And I'm not sure anybody wishes that to happen. And so for us in SEN, we are calling all the stakeholders to, adopt a posture that allows for a consensus approach to dealing with this issue, as has been alluded by the speaker.
Yeah. Many thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
It was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My guest is still Alhaji Momini Mohammed, the Deputy Country Director for SEN Ghana, and we've been talking about the implications of the non-passage of the appropriation bill in Parliament due to a stalemate. I also got the opportunity to speak with some business journalists in the country to also find out from their views and sentiments about the non-passage of this budget, which was expected to be delivered by the Finance Minister in Parliament. Yeah, so Eben, we have a stalemate in Parliament. There's a budget that's supposed to go through the House, but we currently have a stalemate. What do you think the implications of this is going to bother on moving into next year?
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, I understand that it's going to affect our budget, because budget has to be approved. And like you asked earlier, with the appropriation bill, it has to be introduced in Parliament before the previous year, before the subsequent year. And so 2025, I can envisage a tougher time for the country. Why is it going to be a tougher time for the country? Because once it's introduced and approved, then it gives an opportunity for government agencies, departments, ministries to be able to expend whatever money, allocate resources that are given to them. But with the stalemate that we are having now, it's going to be tough, I must say. Except that, because what I was discussing with other colleagues was that, so going into 2025, are we going to have a situation where consolidated fund, where some of the money will be drawn from, and the Constitution, if I can recall, it talks about, it's Article 173, where we are obliged under that within that purview to ensure that a certain amount of money is allocated to the ministries. Now, how are they going to do any other thing? It means that they can't. Basically, I don't know how they're going to do it, but so it's going to have implications, and that is going to be dire. For the country. But I hear they are still talking. Well, we've not had any official statement for any of the quarters, but people have suggested that they should speak among themselves, so that they'll be able to address these challenges, so that it doesn't affect us in 2025.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so Jesse, as of now, we've not been able to pass an appropriation bill in Parliament due to the stalemate. What implications do you think this would have on spending and also government policies, particularly moving into a new year, 2025?
Yeah, okay, so generally we know the appropriation bill is supposed to guide government spending in specific areas, but clearly if this continues and we are not able to pass it, it will lead to overspending, it will affect government expenditure, and totally it will even increase the country's debt, because we might be using money meant for other projects to finance other projects. So I think going into the election year, we should be expecting maybe more spending on the part of government, and generally this could even affect the budget and Ghana's total debt stock. Yeah,
Fuad, so tell us, we know the appropriation bill hasn't been presented before Parliament. What do you think what are the implications of this, particularly moving into a new year, a new government come January 7th?
So I think the delay in the passage of the appropriations bill has enormous fiscal implications for the country. it could delay government spending for the next fiscal year, which is 2025. And so, but then I think there's still hope, because per the law, the government has up to 31st December to pass all the necessary bills it should pass. So, in as much as there is this current impasse between the NDC caucus and the NPP caucus, although it has been resolved, I believe there's enough time, there's sufficient time. There's even a whole month for December, even after the elections, for the Parliament to sit and pass the appropriation bill. So, yes, it may be there may be some fiscal implications if it is not passed, but then I'm very hopeful that it will be passed before 31st per the law.
I think that every country needs a budget to run, and considering the current stalemate with Parliament, that would evidently mean that government business will come to a halt. So everything from education to healthcare and others would be affected. But let's just say I am optimistic that the impasse will be resolved and the preparation for the next couple of months will be put forth.
I mean, you're optimistic, but the timelines are very, very tight. We have about 3 weeks to head to the polls, and majority of the lawmakers in Parliament want to be in their constituency and then campaign for the election. So how do you think a recall is going to work out? They have to pass certain bills. The finance minister has to come before the floor. So we are in uncharted territory. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Like you said, we're on uncharted territories. Vested interests at this point might be dictating a lot, but then again, we know the implications of a failure to have an appropriation ahead of the transition, if there would be a transition. Whatever it is, there will be a transition, whatever the next administration is. So I'm still optimistic that the relevant stakeholders would come together and get it sorted out.
So we've come to the end of our brief discussion with the Deputy Country Director for Sen Ghana, Ahaji Mumuni Mohammed, and we've been talking about the implications of the non-passage of a budget which was expected to be presented by the Finance Minister before Parliament, but that has not been done due to a stalemate. He's been my guest on this week's edition of BizTech. Before we go, don't forget to log on to our website, www.ghanaweb.com. Don't forget to follow us on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @the GhanaWeb, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, GhanaWeb TV. I am Mauli Aholimega. Many thanks for watching.